Let's discuss this development in Kentucky with Dr. Justin Udie, Senior Consultant, Climate Change, Impact and Adaptation, Atkins Global. He joins us from the United Kingdom via Zoom. Good to have you join us, Dr. Justin.
Thank you for having me, Precious. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We have seen record-breaking temperatures across Europe and the US as well, and just extreme weather conditions around the world. There is no part of the world that is spared. Is this going to become the norm, something that we'll have to live with?
Well, first, thank you again. It's unfortunate that this is happening now and it's impacting lives. This is just lives. There are going to be other impacts because, of course, they're going to be primary, secondary, and cascading impacts of this climate-related disaster. To answer your question directly, reasonably, yes, until when we've been able to do enough to reduce this impact, it sounds like it's going to be a new way of life, unfortunately, especially in vulnerable communities or countries around the world.
And we are still trying to, just globally, we're still trying to develop technology to better predict these events. But it does seem like the best option we have now is adaptation. What sort of measures should we put in place to deal with, or emergency measures to deal with this kind of crisis?
Yeah. First, we need to understand and accept that this is a problem. Because in the US in particular, not everyone will accept that climate change is real, if it is climate change. But first, let me put this in context. The Kentucky case is like, when it comes to the issue of flooding that is happening now, is not like a recurring issue. Yes, like a one in a long-term effect. So we need to understand that so that we don't become alarmists in the process. But yes, the global temperature has changed and then there's much precipitation. More of this torrential rainfall is now causing this flood crisis at the moment. Now we need to now understand that, yes, and accept that this is a reality before we can deal with this issue. So in planning for these adaptations, there need to be two ways of going about it. To understand first that there need to be a physical response and there need to be some kind of corporate adaptation. First, that corporate adaptation is when organizations build, or businesses or communities or states like Kentucky build the necessary human resource capacity and organizational capacity to adapt to climate change. That will be one. In that case, the federal government, which I believe and I know, like every other person will argue, that the present government in the US is really keen about climate issues and they're investing in it, which is very good. So the federal government, the state government, the local counties and government, including the media, society, we call them activists, need to have a collaborative approach to engaging around these issues of flooding and reducing their impacts. If we're talking about impacts now, in the first place, which has to do with maybe evacuation of people on time, creating that kind of necessary awareness and letting people know that these are the predicted issues that are coming and people responding as required to these issues. That is one. Then the next one now has to do with physical planning of the system. Number one, first is that rivers will overtop, like the case of the Kentucky River, when you have that river overtopping, overflowing, that will have impact. So how do you deal with that in a way? Proper channelization of maybe towns will be one of them. Channeling water and constructing drainages will be another one. The way you build and reinforce houses, roads, and other critical infrastructure within these areas must have, first, the resilience, and second, the adaptive capacity, or what we call the resistance to these events. All of these are kind of reactionary. Then what we need to do, or what we'll do globally or at the macro level, is to look at the causes of flood or flooding and climate change generally and begin to invest in mitigation.
And that's what I want to talk to you about, the idea of mitigation, because it doesn't look like we're getting anywhere with that. We see that, for example, there is now concern over countries turning to coal just to turn up heats and energy in the country because of the Russian gas conflict and dependence rather on Russian gas. Is that a concern for you that some countries in Europe might return to coal to generate energy? And then what implication could that have on the measures to mitigate the effects of climate change?
Yes, we know even from the recent last week, people are beginning to return to a life as normal, maybe using this fossil energy because human beings need to adapt. So going back to coal when you don't have any other source of energy is part of adaptation for survival in this case. But then the implication is that we're going to have more greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere, and then you're going to have more of these rainfall and then torrential rainfall, if you call it. Of course, flooding will continue. I was trying to tell you that the US is signatory to the Paris Agreement, which means that they need to work very hard to reduce their emission and keep their emission below. I think everybody that is signatory to that agreement will need to work very hard to keep global temperature at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So that means that the US as a country or the entire world need to look out for alternative energy systems and reducing energy from transport. The US, for instance, more than a quarter of their energy CO2 emissions or CO2 equivalent emissions come from transport, and more than half of the overall come from transport and energy. So, and of course, you know, they are the leaders in shale gas. So investing in alternative energy, which might include solar, geothermal, and any other that is available in their geopolitical space would be very, very essential. We go into transport, alternative sources of transport or sustainable transport systems. People are building electric trains, different places that you need to look out for. The electric cars, you know, selling in the market, that is an area to invest. Then you talk about human behavior. Human behavior now, generally, what do we consume? Most of the things, water, energy, gas, our own transport in our own cars, has all what we call carbon footprints. So we need now to begin to adjust how much you heat your house if you need to use energy, and there is a way you can reduce that. That is important. How you travel as individuals is important.
And it is worrying, Dr. J, because as gas prices continue to soar, people are returning to coal and returning to even stove. So it is kind of worrying because it looks like this is going to have a global impact. But all eyes are on Egypt to see what commitments and leaders will make in the COP27. Thank you so much for talking to us, Dr. Justin Udie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.